Three thugs cornered a young cashier late at night, holding a knife to her throat. They thought she was helpless, completely alone in the store. But they made a fatal mistake. They didn't check the back aisle. The Vampire King stepped out of the shadows, caught a bullet with his bare hand, and froze the entire room with a single glare. He looked at the terrified girl, turned to the attackers, and whispered the last words they would ever hear. "You disrupted my evening." A flickering fluorescent light buzzes overhead, the only witness to a crime about to unfold in the dead of night. Three men corner a young woman against the counter, their shadows stretching long and jagged like teeth across the linoleum floor. She thinks she is alone, that her life is measured in the seconds before they strike, but she is wrong. What she doesn't know is that the most dangerous predator in the city isn't the man holding the knife, but the silent figure standing in the shadows of aisle 4, watching with eyes older than the foundation of the building itself. The convenience store smelled of stale coffee and lemon-scented cleaner, a scent that had permanently etched itself into Alara's pores. It was 2:43 a.m. The digital clock on the register blinked the time with mocking cheerful red numbers. Outside, the city of Viridia was a sleeping beast, rain slicking the asphalt, reflecting the neon signs that sputtered and died in the damp air. Inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator units and the rhythmic tapping of Alara's fingers against the counter. She was 23, tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix, with dark circles under eyes that were too sharp for someone who spent her life scanning barcodes. She adjusted the name tag pinned to her vest. It was crooked. It was always crooked. Her gaze flickered to the monitor displaying the security feed. Grainy black and white footage showed the empty aisles. Well, mostly empty. There was still that one customer in the back. He had been there for 20 minutes, standing perfectly still in the wine section. He wore a long, dark coat that looked too expensive for a place that sold hot dogs spinning on greased rollers. He hadn't moved. He hadn't checked his phone. He just stood there, staring at a bottle of cheap Merlot as if it were an ancient artifact. Alara had considered asking him to leave. Store policy said no loitering, but something about him stopped her. A primitive alarm bell ringing in the base of her skull. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the feeling you get when you stand too close to the edge of a cliff. A recognition of gravity. The bell above the door jingled. Not the gentle chime of a regular customer, but a violent jangle as the door was shoved open with force. Alara stiffened. Her hand instinctively drifted beneath the counter, hovering inches from the panic button. Three men walked in. They brought the smell of the street with them, rain, exhaust, and the sharp, metallic tang of cheap alcohol. They were loud, their laughter harsh and jagged, bouncing off the linoleum. They didn't look at the snacks. They didn't look at the drinks. They looked straight at her. "Closing time yet, sweetheart?" the leader asked. He was tall, wearing a leather jacket that had seen better days, a spiderweb tattoo creeping up his neck. "We're open 24 hours, Alara said. Her voice was steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Can I help you find something?" The leader grinned, revealing a gold tooth. "Just looking." They spread out. A classic pincer move. One went to the left, near the magazine rack. One went to the right, blocking the path to the stockroom. The leader approached the counter, leaning over it until she could smell the sour whiskey on his breath. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to a mock whisper, "it's dangerous for a pretty thing like you to be working all alone out here. The bottoms. Bad things happen in the bottoms." "I'm not alone," Alara lied. "My manager is in the back." The man on the right laughed. "We saw the manager leave an hour ago, driving that beat-up Toyota. You're all by yourself, darling." Alara's blood turned to ice. They had been watching. "Empty the register," the leader said, the smile vanishing. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. He pulled a knife from his belt, a jagged, serrated thing that caught the fluorescent light. "And don't touch that button, or I'll carve a smile onto that pretty face." Alara didn't move. Her mind raced, calculating the distance to the door, the time it would take to hurdle the counter. Too far. Too slow. Now, he slammed his hand on the counter. Alara keyed in the code. The drawer popped open with a mechanical ding. She began grabbing handfuls of cash, fives, tens, a few 20s. It wasn't much. Maybe $200. That's it, the leader sneered, snatching the money from her hand. That's barely enough for a round of drinks. It's a Tuesday, Alara said, her voice tight. It's slow. The leader reached out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was bruising, his fingers digging into her skin. Maybe there's something else of value here. The other two men chuckled, stepping closer, closing the circle. The air in the store grew suffocatingly hot, heavy with their aggression. Alara tried to pull back, but his grip was iron. Panic clawed at her throat. She was going to die here, between the lottery tickets and the chewing gum. She was going to die, and no one would know until the morning shift came in at 6. Let her go. The voice came from the back of the store. It wasn't loud. It didn't shout. It was a low, resonant baritone, smooth as velvet but carrying the weight of a falling tombstone. The thugs froze. The leader didn't release her wrist, but he turned his head, eyes narrowing. Who the hell is that? The figure in the long coat stepped out of the shadows of aisle 4. He moved with an eerie grace, a fluidity that made him seem like he was gliding rather than walking. As he stepped into the light, Alara saw his face for the first time. He was striking, pale skin that looked like marble under moonlight, high cheekbones sharp enough to cut, and eyes. His eyes were the color of polished amber, burning with a cold, ancient intelligence. He looked to be in his 30s, perhaps, but the air around him felt old. Centuries old. I said, the stranger repeated, taking another step. Let her go. The leader laughed, though it sounded uncertain. Go back to your wine, heavy metal. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me, the stranger said, because you are disrupting my evening. And I detest disruptions. The thug on the left, the one by the magazines, pulled a switchblade. Get lost, freak. Before we got you too. The stranger stopped. He was 10 feet away from them. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a distant song. Then he sighed. It was a sound of profound boredom. Very well. The temperature in the store plummeted. It wasn't a gradual cooling. It was instant. The windows frosted over with a spiderweb of white ice. The condensation on the soda bottles froze solid. Alara's breath puffed out in a white cloud. The leader's hand on her wrist went numb, his skin turning pale. What the? The leader stammered, finally releasing her as he rubbed his arm. What did you do? The stranger didn't answer. He moved. He didn't run. He simply ceased to be there and began to be here. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next, he was standing directly in front of the thug with the switchblade. The thug thrust the knife forward. The stranger caught his wrist. There was a sickening crunch of bone, loud as a gunshot in the silent store. The thug screamed, dropping the knife, but the sound was cut short as the stranger backhanded him. It looked like a casual gesture, a swatting of a fly, but the man flew across the store, crashing into a display of potato chips and sliding to the floor, unconscious. The second thug, the one near the stockroom, panicked. He pulled a pistol from his waistband. No! Alara screamed. The gun went off. Bang! The glass of the front door shattered. But the stranger hadn't fallen. He had sidestepped the bullet with a movement so fast it was a blur, a shadow detaching itself from reality. He was in front of the gunman before the casing hit the floor. He grabbed the barrel of the gun with his bare hand. The metal twisted. He crushed the steel as if it were wet clay, bending the barrel upward. The gunman stared at his ruined weapon, eyes bulging with primal terror. The stranger placed a hand on the man's chest and shoved. The man flew backward, through the open stockroom door, crashing into stacks of soda crates. Silence followed. Now, only the leader remained. He stood by the counter, trembling. The knife in his hand shook violently. The air was so cold now that frost was forming on his eyelashes. The stranger turned to him. His amber eyes were devoid of anger. There was no rage there, only a vast, indifferent emptiness, like the bottom of a deep ocean. Please, the leader whimpered, backing away until he hit the cigarette display. I didn't know. Ignorance, the stranger said softly, stepping closer, is rarely a valid defense. He stopped inches from the leader. He reached out, his pale fingers long and elegant, and plucked the knife from the man's trembling hand. He looked at the blade with disdain, then snapped it in half with his thumb and forefinger. The metal tinked against the floor. "Leave," the stranger commanded. His voice vibrated in Alara's chest, deep and commanding. "If I see you in this city again, I will not be so gentle." The leader didn't need to be told twice. He bolted, scrambling over the unconscious body of his friend in the chips, slipping on the linoleum, and bursting out the door into the rainy night. Silence returned to the store. A heavy, frozen silence. Alara stood behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge so hard her knuckles were white. She was shaking. Not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. She stared at the man in the long coat. He stood amidst the wreckage of her store, the shattered glass and scattered chips, looking entirely untouched. He brushed a speck of dust from his lapel. Then, slowly, he turned his amber gaze toward her. Alara stopped breathing. Up close, he was terrifyingly beautiful. His skin was flawless, his features symmetrical in a way that felt unnatural. But it was the stillness of him that frightened her most. He didn't sway, didn't fidget. He was absolute stillness. "Are you harmed?" he asked. His voice was softer now, the commanding edge replaced by a polite, almost courtly tone. Alara's voice failed her. She cleared her throat. "No, I'm okay." He studied her. His gaze felt like a physical touch, scanning her face, her neck, her hands. It wasn't lecherous, it was clinical assessing. "Your heart rate is elevated. 140 beats per minute. You just froze the room," Alara whispered, the absurdity of the statement hitting her. "And you threw a man across the aisle like he was a doll." "He was light," the stranger said dismissively. He walked toward the counter. Alara resisted the urge to step back. He reached into his coat pocket. Alara flinched. He paused, his eyes softening slightly. "Peace, little one. I am not them." He pulled out a crisp $50 bill and placed it on the counter next to the open register. Then he placed a bottle of Merlot, the one he had been staring at, next to it. "For the wine," he said. "And for the inconvenience." Alara stared at the money, then at him. "Who are you?" He hesitated. A shadow passed over his face, a flicker of something ancient and weary. "Someone who is thirsty." He turned to leave, his coat swirling around his ankles like smoke. "Wait," Alara called out. He stopped, his hand on the doorframe. He didn't turn around. "Thank you," she said. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. "You saved my life." He stood there for a long moment, the cold air from outside mixing with the unnatural chill inside. "Go home, Alara Vance," he said, and the sound of her full name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. "Lock your doors. The night has teeth, and not all of them are as restrained as mine." Then he stepped out into the rain and vanished into the darkness, leaving Alara alone in the frozen ruin of the convenience store, the smell of ozone and fear lingering in the air. The walk to her apartment was a blur of paranoia. Alara kept checking over her shoulder, jumping at every shadow, every splash of a car tire on wet pavement. The stranger's warning echoed in her mind. The night has teeth. She lived in the crumbling district of East End, where the streetlights worked intermittently and the buildings leaned against each other like drunkards for support. Her apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up, a tiny studio with a leaky faucet and a view of a brick wall. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the deadbolt. Once inside, she slammed the door and threw all 3 locks. She grabbed a chair from the kitchenette and wedged it under the doorknob. Only then did she allow herself to slide down to the floor, burying her face in her knees. She stayed there for a long time, listening to the rain drum against the single window. Who was he? She had seen things in this city. Everyone whispered about the old families, the wealthy elite who lived in the high district, behind iron gates and security details. Rumors said they dabbled in the occult, that they drank blood, that they lived forever. But those were just stories to scare children and explain away the crushing inequality of Viridia. But tonight, the ice, the speed, the strength, that wasn't a story. That was real. Ilara pulled her knees tighter to her chest. She felt marked. He had known her name. How had he known her name? The name tag only said Ilara. He had called her Ilara Vance. She finally stood up, her legs stiff. She needed to wash the smell of the store off her skin. She went to the tiny bathroom and turned on the shower. The water was lukewarm, but she stood under it until her skin turned pink, scrubbing at her wrist where the thug had grabbed her, as if she could scrub away the memory of his touch. When she stepped out, wrapping a towel around herself, she saw it. Sitting on her small, chipped coffee table was a card. Ilara froze. She lived alone. She had locked the door. She had wedged the chair. She approached the table slowly, as if the card were a bomb. It was thick, heavy cardstock, cream-colored with gold edges. There was no name, only a symbol embossed in the center, a stylized dragon coiled around a sword. She picked it up. It smelled of cedar and old paper. On the back, written in elegant, flowing script with black ink, was a single line. They will return. Do not go back to the store. Ilara dropped the card. She ran to the door. The locks were still engaged. The chair was still wedged under the knob. The window was painted shut. He had been here, while she was in the shower. In her home. A mixture of terror and awe swirled in her gut. He could have killed her. He could have done anything. Instead, he had left a warning. She looked around her tiny, shabby apartment. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage. And somewhere out there in the rain, a dragon was watching. The next morning, the city of Viridia woke up gray and sullen. Ilara didn't sleep. She sat on her bed, clutching a kitchen knife, watching the dust motes dance in the morning light. At 8 a.m., her phone buzzed. It was her manager, Mr. Henderson. Ilara? You okay? His voice was shrill. I'm fine, she said, her voice raspy. Mr. Henderson, last night. I saw the footage, he interrupted. The police have it. The whole place is. Ilara, the freezers are blown. The pipes burst. It looks like a bomb went off, but everything is just frozen. The police are asking questions I can't answer. I was robbed, Ilara said. 3 men. I know, I saw them. And I saw the other guy. Mr. Henderson's voice dropped to a whisper. Ilara, do you know who that was? No. A customer. That wasn't a customer, Henderson hissed. I've lived in this city 60 years. I know that coat. I know that crest on the ring he wears. That was Lysander Thorne. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. The name hit her with the weight of a legend. Lysander Thorne. The recluse billionaire. The owner of the Thorne Tower that dominated the skyline. The man who hadn't been seen in public in 20 years. Why was Lysander Thorne buying cheap wine in your store at 3 a.m.? Henderson asked. I don't know. Look, Ilara, you can't come back. What? Indignation flared through her fatigue. I was the victim. I know. But if Thorne is involved, and the Vipers, those thugs were Iron Vipers, Ilara. They run the rackets in the Lower East. If they think you're connected to Thorne, or if they think you saw something, it's too dangerous. For the store. For me. You're firing me? I'm giving you 2 weeks severance. I'll mail the check. Just stay away, kid. For your own good. The line went dead. Ilara stared at the phone. Fired. Because she didn't die. She stood up, anger replacing the fear. It was a cold, hard anger, the kind that kept you moving when you wanted to collapse. She had rent to pay. She had a grandmother in a care facility whose bills were already overdue. She couldn't afford to be afraid of urban legends or street gangs. She needed a job. She dressed quickly, jeans, a thick sweater, sturdy boots. She grabbed her bag and the mysterious card from the table. She shoved the card into her pocket. She would throw it away later. She stepped out of her building into the drizzle. The street was busy with the morning commute. People with umbrellas, cars splashing through puddles. It felt normal, mundane. But as she walked toward the subway station, the feeling returned. The prickle on the back of her neck. She glanced at the reflection in a shop window. A black sedan was crawling along the street, matching her pace. The windows were tinted dark. Ilara walked faster. The car sped up. She turned a corner sharply, ducking into an alleyway that cut through to the next block. It was a shortcut she used often. The sedan screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. Two doors flew open. It wasn't the thugs from last night. These men were professionals. They wore dark suits, but they moved with the predatory aggression of hired muscle. "Miss Vance," one of them called out. "Mr. Valerius would like a word." Alara didn't wait. She ran. She sprinted down the alley, jumping over trash bags and puddles. The alley exited onto a busy market street. If she could make it there, there would be witnesses. Get her. Footsteps pounded behind her. Heavy fast. She reached the end of the alley, bursting out onto the sidewalk, and ran straight into a wall of solid black wool. Strong hands caught her by the shoulders, steadying her. "Careful," a familiar, low voice murmured. Alara looked up. It was him. Lysander Thorne. He looked different in the daylight, though no less imposing. He wore a charcoal suit under the coat today, and sunglasses that hid his amber eyes. He stood like a statue in the middle of the bustling crowd, yet people seemed to subconsciously part around him, leaving a circle of empty space. The two men from the alley skidded to a halt. When they saw who was holding Alara, they went pale. They stopped 10 feet away, looking like deer caught in headlights. "Thorne," one of the men breathed. Lysander didn't look at them. He looked down at Alara, his hands still gripping her shoulders. His touch was cool, even through her sweater. "I told you not to go back to the store," he said calmly. "I didn't," Alara gasped, trying to catch her breath. "They found me at home. They followed me." Lysander's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. He slowly lifted his gaze to the two men in suits. "Valerius is growing bold," Lysander said. His voice was conversational, but it carried a lethal undercurrent. "Sending his dogs to chase women in the street." "She's a loose end," the lead suit said, though his voice wavered. She saw the display. "The masquerade requires." "The masquerade," Lysander interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, "is my concern. Not Valerius's." He released one of Alara's shoulders and raised a hand. He didn't freeze the air this time. He simply made a gesture, a sharp flick of his wrist. The ground beneath the men's feet cracked. The concrete sidewalk split open with a sound like a thunderclap, creating a jagged fissure between the men and Alara. Passers-by screamed and scattered. "Tell your master," Lysander said, his voice projecting over the panic of the crowd, "that Alara Vance is under my protection. If he touches a hair on her head, I will pull his ivory tower down brick by brick and bury him in the rubble." The men stared at the crack in the earth, then at the vampire lord. They nodded, once, terrified, and retreated back into the alley, running for their lives. Alara looked at the fissure in the sidewalk. It was deep. Dark. "Come," Lysander said. He turned, placing a hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward a sleek, black limousine that had idled up to the curb. "Where are we going?" Alara asked, digging her heels in. She wasn't just going to get in a car with a stranger, even one who had saved her twice. Lysander paused. He took off his sunglasses. Those amber eyes bored into hers, but this time, there was a glimmer of something else. "Respect? You have lost your job," he said. "You have lost your safety. Your home is compromised. You have two choices, Alara. You can stay here on the sidewalk and wait for them to return, and they will return. Or you can come with me." "To where?" "To the only place in this city where Valerius cannot reach you," Lysander said. "To the Thorn Tower." Alara looked back at the alley. She thought of the thugs, the suits, the endless terrifying possibilities. Then she looked at Lysander. He was dangerous, yes. Like a storm is dangerous. But he had stood between her and the wolves. "I need a job," she said stubbornly. Lysander blinked, surprised. A corner of his mouth quirked upward. It was almost a smile. "We have openings. We can discuss your employment terms on the way." He opened the car door for her. Alara took a deep breath, stepped off the curb, and climbed into the darkness of the limousine. As the door clicked shut, sealing out the noise of the city, she knew she had just crossed a threshold from which she could never return. The interior of the limousine was silent as a grave and smelled of leather and cedar, the same scent that had been on the card. Lysander sat opposite her, his long legs crossed, his gaze fixed on the passing city through the tinted window. Ilara clutched her bag to her chest. "You're a vampire," she said. It wasn't a question. Lysander didn't turn. "That is the vulgar term, yes. We prefer kindred or simply the night-touched dot. And the men who chased me? Thralls. Humans bound to the service of a vampire in exchange for favors. Usually blood, money, or power. And Valerius? A mistake," Lysander said, his voice hardening. "A rival who mistakes cruelty for strength." He finally turned to look at her. "You process information quickly." Most humans would still be screaming. "I don't have time to scream," Ilara said. "I have bills." Lysander let out a short, dry laugh. Practicality. A rare trait. "Tell me, Ilara, why did you stay at the store last night? You saw me. You felt the danger. Yet you stayed." "I needed the shift," she said simply. "Overtime pay." Lysander stared at her for a long time. His expression was unreadable, but the air in the car seemed to grow slightly warmer, less oppressive. "You risked your life for overtime?" "Survival isn't free, Mr. Thorne." "No," he murmured, looking at his own pale hands. "It is not." The car slowed. They were approaching the center of the city, where the skyline was pierced by the Thorne Tower. It was a monstrosity of black glass and steel, spiraling upward like a needle. It was beautiful and intimidating. "What happens now?" Ilara asked as the car turned into a private underground entrance. "Now," Lysander said, "you enter my world. A world of politics, blood, and ancient laws. You will be safe here, but you must understand something." He leaned forward, his eyes capturing hers. "Once you enter the tower as my guest, you are marked. The city will know you are mine. That protection grants you safety, but it also paints a target on your back for anyone wishing to hurt me." "They were already targeting me," Ilara pointed out. "True." He sat back. "But now you will have teeth of your own." The car stopped. The door opened. Lysander stepped out and extended a hand to her. Ilara looked at it. His skin was pale, his fingers long and strong. Taking that hand meant accepting everything: the magic, the danger, the vampires. She reached out and took it. His grip was firm, cool, and surprisingly gentle. "Welcome to the Thorne Tower," Lysander said. As she stepped out onto the polished marble of the underground garage, Ilara felt a shift in the air. A hum of energy that seemed to radiate from the building itself. She wasn't just a cashier anymore. She was part of the story now. The elevator ride to the summit of Thorne Tower took exactly 45 seconds, a seamless ascent that defied gravity. The cabin was glass, allowing the city of Viridia to shrink beneath Ilara's feet until the cars were nothing more than red and white blood cells flowing through concrete veins. Lysander stood with his back to the view, watching the digital floor numbers climb. He hadn't released her hand immediately upon entering the lift, and when he finally did, Ilara felt a phantom coldness where his skin had touched hers. "Do you live alone?" she asked, the silence stretching too thin for her comfort. "Solitude is the tax levied on immortality," Lysander replied, his eyes fixed on the numbers. "But to answer your question practically, no. I have staff. Though they are discreet." The doors slid open with a soft hiss. Ilara stepped out and forgot to breathe. The penthouse wasn't just a home, it was a cathedral of shadows and glass. The ceiling vaulted 20 feet high, lost in darkness. The walls were floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the rain-swept city. The furniture was sparse, sleek, modern Italian leather mixed with heavy, Gothic antiques that looked like they had been salvaged from a burning castle. It was beautiful, breathtakingly so, but it felt sterile. It was a space designed to be looked at, not lived in. Like a museum exhibit titled "The Lonely King." "Master Lysander," a voice clipped from the hallway to the left. Ilara jumped. A man emerged from the shadows. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair slicked back and a posture so rigid he looked like he had a steel rod for a spine. He wore a pristine waistcoat and carried a silver tray holding a single crystal decanter. "Silas," Lysander nodded, unbuttoning his heavy coat. "We have a guest." Silas's eyes, sharp and gray, flicked to Ilara. He didn't look surprised, he looked resigned. "I see." Shall I prepare the guest suite in the East Wing? Or will she be leaving before sunrise? She will be staying, Lysander said, handing his coat to the older man. Indefinitely. Her name is Alara Vance. She is under the protection of the House of Thorn. Ensure the staff understands that this is not a suggestion. Silas paused, the coat draped over his arm. For a brief second, the mask of the perfect butler slipped, revealing genuine concern. Sir, the council meeting is in 3 days. Bringing a human into the residence now, it will send a signal. Let them read the smoke signals, Silas, Lysander said, walking past him toward the massive window. I am tired of playing dead. Silas bowed slightly to Alara. Miss Vance. Welcome to the precipice. He turned and vanished into the hallway, leaving them alone in the vast, silent room. He doesn't like me, Alara noted, hugging her arms to her chest. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that would keep meat fresh. Silas worries, Lysander said, staring out at the city. He has served my family for 50 years. He remembers the last time I involved myself in human affairs. It did not end well. Alara walked further into the room. Her boots squeaked on the black marble floor. What happened? Lysander turned. The ambient light from the city below cast his face in half-shadow, making the angles of his cheekbones look sharper, more predatory. That is a story for a different night. For now, you're safe. Silas will show you to your room. There is food in the kitchen, human food, fresh. Sleep. You look like a ghost. I can't just sleep, Alara said, her chin tilting up. You said I had a choice. I chose to come here because I need a job. I'm not a pet, Mr. Thorn. I'm not going to sit in a tower and wait for you to bring me things. Lysander studied her. A flicker of amusement danced in his amber eyes. You are persistent. I'm poor, she corrected. There's a difference. He walked over to a massive desk made of dark mahogany, dominating one corner of the room. It was covered in stacks of parchment, leather-bound books, and a sleek modern laptop. The collision of centuries. Very well, he said. Silas is getting too old to manage the archives. The history of my kind is extensive and currently in disarray. You will organize it. You will digitize the records that can be digitized and preserve the ones that cannot. You will handle my correspondence with the human world, bills, acquisitions, legal matters. Alara blinked. You want me to be a librarian? I want you to be the keeper of the chronicle, Lysander said, his voice adding a weight to the title that made it sound like a knighthood. It pays $4,000 a month, plus room and board. Is that acceptable? Alara's jaw dropped slightly. That was triple what she made at the store. Yes. Yes, that's acceptable. Good. Lysander turned back to the window, dismissing her. Silas will find you. Do not leave the building, Alara. The threshold holds a blood ward. Inside, you are untouchable. Outside, you're prey. The first week at Thorn Tower was a lesson in isolation. Alara was given a suite that was larger than her entire apartment building. It had a bed with silk sheets, a bathroom with a tub deep enough to swim in, and a wardrobe filled with clothes that fit her perfectly, courtesy of Silas, who had sized her up with a single glance. She saw Lysander rarely. He slept during the day, obviously. She would wake up, have breakfast prepared by the unseen kitchen staff, and spend her hours in the library. The library was a 2-story room filled with the smell of dust and vanilla. Books climbed the walls on spiraling iron staircases. Some were new hardcovers, others were crumbling scrolls sealed in glass cases. She worked diligently. She created a spreadsheet for the expenses. She organized the letters, invitations to galas, threats from rivals, requests for audiences. She began to piece together the world she had stepped into. The kindred weren't just monsters in the dark. They were a society. There was a council. There were territories. Lysander Thorn was a primogen, an elder of immense power who held the seat for the entire central district. But he was a recluse. The letters painted a picture of a king who had abandoned his throne, leaving a power vacuum that men like Valerius were trying to fill. On the 5th night, Alara was working late in the library. It was 2 a.m. The rest of the city was asleep, but the tower was waking up. She was cataloging a series of journals from the 1800s when the heavy oak doors creaked open. Lysander walked in. He wasn't wearing his coat. He wore a white dress shirt, the top buttons undone, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were corded with muscle and marked with faint, silver scars. He held a glass of red liquid. Alara hoped it was wine. He stopped when he saw her. "You are still awake." "I'm a night owl," Alara said, closing the journal. "Comes with the shift work." He walked to the grand piano that sat in the corner of the library, covered in a dust sheet. He pulled the sheet off with a fluid motion, revealing the polished ebony wood. "How do you find the work?" he asked, sitting on the bench. "Interesting," Alara said, swiveling her chair to face him. "You have a lot of enemies, Mr. Thorne." "Lysander," he corrected gently. He placed his fingers on the keys, but didn't press down. "And yes, power breeds envy. Indifference breeds contempt. I have been indifferent for a long time." "Why?" He pressed a key. A low, mournful C-sharp rang out. "Because the world changes, Alara, but we do not. We are statues in a river. Eventually, you tire of watching the water flow past. So you just stopped participating?" "I stopped caring," he murmured. He began to play. It wasn't a song she recognized. It was complex, turbulent, full of crashing chords and sudden, delicate silences. It sounded like a storm trapped in a box. Alara watched his hands. They moved with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. For a monster, he created something incredibly human. She stood up and walked closer, drawn by the music. She stopped at the curve of the piano. "The men who attacked me," she said over the music. "Valerius. The letters say he's challenging your claim to the Central District." Lysander didn't stop playing. "He is a scavenger. He thinks because I am quiet, I am weak. Are you?" The music stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy. Lysander looked up at her. His eyes were burning again. "Weakness is a luxury I cannot afford. But I am weary." "Why did you save me?" she asked. It was the question that had been burning a hole in her mind for 5 days. "You said you hate disruptions. You could have just ignored the robbery. Why step in?" Lysander stood up. He towered over her, stealing the light from the room. He moved around the piano until he was standing in front of her, close enough that she could feel the chill radiating from him. "Because," he said softly, his voice rougher than usual, "I watched you for 20 minutes. You were afraid. I could hear your heart fluttering like a trapped bird. But you didn't run. You stood your ground. You looked at the camera, knowing no one was coming, and you straightened your name tag." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, not quite touching. "I have seen armies flee in terror," he whispered. "I have seen kings beg for mercy. But true courage, the quiet kind, the kind that exists when no one is watching, that is rare." It was bright. In a very dark room, you were bright. Alara stopped breathing. Her heart did that hammering thing again. "And," Lysander added, his hand dropping, his expression closing off, "I really did want that wine." The moment shattered. He stepped back, the distance returning. "Go to bed, Alara. Tomorrow brings trouble." "What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," Lysander said, his face grim, "the council comes to inspect my new acquisition. You will need to look your best. They smell fear." The arrival of the council representative was not subtle. At sunset the next day, a helicopter landed on the roof of the tower. The vibrations shook the crystal glasses in the penthouse. Silas was in a frenzy, polishing silver that was already spotless. He had dressed Alara in a gown he had seemingly pulled from thin air, a deep midnight blue silk that hugged her frame and made her feel like an imposter. "Stand straight," Silas hissed as they waited in the foyer. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not look them in the eye for too long. And, whatever you do, do not bleed." "I wasn't planning on it," Alara muttered, smoothing the silk. The elevator doors opened. 2 guards in tactical gear stepped out first, scanning the room. Then a woman emerged. She was stunning. Tall, with skin the color of mocha and hair braided with gold thread. She wore a suit that cost more than Alara's entire education. But it was her presence that filled the room, a heavy, suffocating pressure that made Alara's knees weak. This was power. Ancient, unapologetic power. Lysander stepped forward from the shadows of the living room. He wore a black suit, perfectly tailored, looking every inch the lord of the tower. Dominique, Lysander said, inclining his head slightly. Lysander, the woman replied. Her voice was like honey poured over gravel. She walked past him, ignoring his greeting, and stopped directly in front of Alara. Alara forced herself to hold the woman's gaze. The woman's eyes were violet, unnatural, and unnerving. So, Dominique said, circling Alara like a shark. This is the stray that has caused such a stir. The girl worth the war. She is my archivist, Lysander said, his voice cool. And a member of my household. Dominique laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. An archivist? Is that what we're calling them now? Valerius claims you broke the peace, Lysander. He claims you maimed 3 of his men and threatened to destroy his holdings. All for a human. His men broke the laws of the city, Lysander said. They were hunting in my territory. I merely disciplined them. You haven't disciplined anyone in 20 years, Dominique snapped, turning back to him. You've been rotting in this tower while the city burns. And now, suddenly, you awake? For her. She pointed a manicured finger at Alara. She is a liability. Valerius is rallying the outer clans. He says you are compromised. Unstable. He is calling for a challenge. Alara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. A challenge. That sounded fatal. Let him call, Lysander said, his face impassive. He has, Dominique said. She reached into her jacket and pulled out an envelope. It was black, sealed with red wax. She tossed it onto the marble table. The solstice masquerade is in 2 weeks. He has challenged you to the right of grievance. If you do not appear, you forfeit your territory. You forfeit your title. She paused, looking at Alara with a cruel smile. And you forfeit your household. Lysander looked at the invitation. He didn't touch it. I will be there, he said. Dominique raised an eyebrow. Will you? You haven't left the tower for a social gathering since the War of '98. Times change, Lysander said. And I am feeling social. Dominique hummed, amused. She walked back to the elevator. Bring the girl, Lysander. If she is truly part of your household, she must be presented. If she survives the night, perhaps the council will recognize her protection. If not, she shrugged. Humans are easily replaced. The doors closed and she was gone. Alara let out a breath she had been holding for 5 minutes. She slumped slightly, the silk dress rustling. The right of grievance, Alara said, her voice trembling. What is that? Lysander walked over to the table and picked up the black envelope. He ran his thumb over the wax seal. It is a duel, he said quietly. Not of swords, but of power, will, and blood. He turned to her. The look on his face was terrifying, a mixture of fury and grim determination. You have 2 weeks, Alara, he said. Silas will teach you etiquette. I will teach you how to survive in a room full of predators who want to drain you dry. Because if we go to this ball, we are not going to hide. He crushed the envelope in his hand, the paper turning to ash in his grip. We are going to show them why they were afraid of the name Thorn in the first place. The next 2 weeks were a blur of exhaustion and terror. The tower transformed from a silent museum into a training ground. Silas was a merciless taskmaster. He taught Alara how to walk so she seemed to float, heel-toe, core engaged, how to speak without giving away emotion, how to identify the rank of a vampire by the crest on their ring or the cut of their clothes. The Iron Vipers wear red, Silas lectured, pacing around her as she balanced a book on her head. They are brutes. Avoid them. The Silver Circle wears white. They are diplomats and liars. Never trust them. And the Court of Shadows. If you see them, you run to Master Lysander immediately. Lysander's lessons were different. They happened at night, in the gym on the lower levels. He didn't teach her how to fight. He told her bluntly that she couldn't fight a vampire and win. He taught her how to resist. Look at me, he commanded. They stood in the center of the mats. Lysander's eyes were glowing faintly. They will try to glamour you, he explained. They will try to push into your mind, make you pliable, make you want to obey. You must build a wall. I don't know how. Alara shouted, sweating, her head pounding from the pressure of his gaze. It felt like physical fingers pressing against her temples. Find something true, Lysander said, stepping closer, the pressure intensifying. Find something they cannot touch. A memory. A feeling. Anchor yourself to it. Alara squeezed her eyes shut. The pressure was overwhelming. A voice in her head, Lysander's voice, but distorted, was whispering, "Kneel. It's easier. Just kneel." She gritted her teeth. She thought of the cold fluorescent light of the store. She thought of her grandmother's hands. She thought of the rage she felt when the thug grabbed her wrist. "I am not a victim." "No," she gasped. She opened her eyes and glared at him. "Get out of my head." The pressure vanished instantly. Lysander stumbled back half a step, blinking. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine one this time. "Good," he breathed. "Very good. You have a mind like a steel trap, Alara Vance." They sat on the edge of the boxing ring, sharing a bottle of water. "Why do you hate them so much?" Alara asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. "The other vampires. You're one of them." Lysander looked at his hands. "I am what I am. But they revel in the cruelty. They treat humanity like cattle. My family, the Thorns, we believed in stewardship. We believed that because we are stronger, we have a duty to protect. The others saw that as weakness. They killed my kin one by one until only I was left." He looked at her, his expression raw. "I hid in this tower because I did not want to become like them to defeat them. But Valerius has forced my hand. We're going to stop him," Alara said firmly. Lysander looked at her with a strange intensity. "You speak as if you're fighting too." "I am," she said. "You gave me teeth, remember?" He laughed softly. He reached out and, for the first time, he touched her simply to touch her. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her jaw. "Be careful, Alara," he whispered. "I am trying to save you. Do not make me fall for you. That is a doom I cannot survive twice." Alara held her breath, the electric tension between them crackling like a live wire. "Maybe," she whispered back, "I'm not the one who needs saving anymore." The night of the solstice masquerade arrived with a storm. Thunder rattled the windows of the tower as Alara stood in front of the full-length mirror in her suite. The dress Lysander had commissioned was a weapon in the form of clothing. It was black velvet, strapless, with a bodice that fit like a second skin and a skirt that flowed like liquid shadow. Tiny crystals were sewn into the fabric so that when she moved, she looked like the night sky brought to life. Around her neck was a heavy silver choker with a single, large amber stone, the thorn crest. It was a collar, yes, but it was also a declaration. She belongs to the king. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," she said. Lysander entered. He stopped dead in his tracks. He was wearing a tuxedo of midnight blue, with a silver mask held in his hand. His hair was swept back, emphasizing the severity of his features. But as he looked at her, the severity melted away. His eyes widened, the pupils glowing wide. "You look." He trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words. "You look like a queen." "I feel like bait," Alara admitted, turning to face him. "The most dangerous bait in the world," Lysander said, walking over to her. He stood behind her, looking at their reflection in the mirror. The vampire lord and the cashier. The predator and the partner. He placed a mask over her eyes. It was delicate silver filigree, covering only the upper half of her face. "Keep your wall up," he murmured into her ear. "Stay by my side. And when the time comes, trust me." "I do," Alara said. And she realized with a jolt that it was true. She trusted this monster with her life. "Then let us go," Lysander said, offering his arm. "The vultures are waiting." The masquerade was held at the Valerius estate, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city. The driveway was lined with luxury cars. The air smelled of expensive perfume, rain, and the metallic tang of blood. As Lysander and Alara walked up the grand staircase, silence rippled through the crowd like a wave. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Music faltered. Lysander walked with his head high, his amber eyes sweeping the room with cold disdain. Alara gripped his arm, her chin lifted, channeling every ounce of defiance she possessed. They reached the top of the stairs and looked down into the ballroom. Hundreds of vampires in masks stared back. At the far end of the room, sitting on a high-backed throne of red velvet, was a man with pale blonde hair and a smile that looked like a knife wound. Valerius. He stood up, spreading his arms wide. Lysander, his voice boomed, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. The ghost of the tower returns. And he brought his pet. Laughter rippled through the room, nervous, sycophantic laughter. Lysander didn't smile. He squeezed Alara's arm once, a signal of reassurance, and then began to descend the stairs. "I am here, Valerius," Lysander called out, his voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. "You asked for a grievance. I have come to answer it." Valerius stepped down from the dais. He was taller than Lysander, broader, radiating a raw, violent heat. "Good," Valerius sneered. "Then let us see if the blood of the thorn still has power, or if it has turned to water." He snapped his fingers. The crowd parted, forming a wide circle in the center of the room. "But first," Valerius said, his eyes locking onto Alara, "let us welcome the little human properly. A dance, perhaps? Before the slaughter begins." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Lysander stiffened. "She is not for your amusement." "Oh, but she is," Valerius purred. "Unless you're afraid she cannot keep up?" The challenge hung in the air. If Lysander refused, he looked weak. If he accepted, he put her in the center of a room full of monsters. Lysander looked down at her. "Do you trust me?" his eyes asked. Alara took a deep breath. She thought of the ice. She thought of the training. She stepped forward, releasing Lysander's arm. "I'll dance," she said, her voice clear and steady. Valerius's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He hadn't expected the mouse to speak. "Excellent," Valerius said. He gestured to the orchestra. "A waltz. Something fast." The music began. It was a frantic, dizzying tempo. Lysander stepped in front of her. "Alara, dance with me," she commanded softly. Lysander stared at her, then bowed. He took her hand and placed his other hand on her waist. They began to move. And the room gasped. They didn't just dance, they flew. Lysander moved with supernatural speed, spinning her, dipping her, lifting her. But Alara matched him. Silas's training had given her grace, but her own adrenaline gave her focus. She anticipated his moves, trusting his strength, letting him guide her through a blur of motion that would have made a normal human sick. They were a whirlwind of black velvet and midnight blue. They were in perfect sync, a binary star system orbiting a center of gravity that only they could feel. For a moment, the danger faded, the vampires faded, and there was only the heat of his hand on her waist and the intensity of his gaze. As the music reached its crescendo, Lysander spun her out and pulled her back in, her chest colliding with his. They stopped, breathing hard, staring at each other. The room was dead silent. Then, slow clapping began. Valerius walked into the circle, clapping his large, pale hands. His face was no longer smiling. It was a mask of cold fury. "Very pretty," Valerius spat. "But the dance is over." He drew a long, thin sword from a cane he held. The metal shimmered with a greenish hue, poison silver. "Now," Valerius roared, pointing the blade at Lysander's throat. "We bleed." The ballroom held its breath. The air crackled with static electricity, the hair on Alara's arms standing up. She stepped back to the edge of the circle, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She wanted to scream, to pull Lysander away, but she knew that interfering now would be a death sentence for both of them. This was their law. Ancient and brutal. Lysander did not draw a weapon. He simply unbuttoned his jacket and tossed it to the side. He rolled up his sleeves with agonizing slowness, revealing the pale, marble-like skin of his forearms. "A sword, Valerius?" Lysander asked, his voice bored. "How quaint. I thought we were testing power, not fencing skills." "I like to feel the cut," Valerius grinned, his eyes black with bloodlust. "I like to see the life leak out." "Come then," Lysander beckoned with one hand. Valerius roared and charged. He moved faster than human eyes could follow, a blur of red violence. The sword slashed through the air where Lysander's neck had been a microsecond before. Lysander hadn't just dodged, he had flowed around the attack like smoke. He appeared behind Valerius, tapping the brute on the shoulder. "Sloppy," Lysander whispered. Valerius spun, swinging the blade in a wide, deadly arc. Lysander ducked, the blade shearing off a lock of his black hair. The crowd gasped. The fight that followed was a terrifying dance of physics defied. Valerius was a hurricane of force, hacking and slashing, shattering the marble floor tiles with missed strikes. Lysander was the wind, intangible, fluid, impossible to pin down. He didn't strike back. He simply evaded, letting Valerius exhaust himself, letting the brute's anger make him clumsy. Alara watched, her hands clutched to her chest. She saw what the others didn't. Lysander was fast, yes, but his movements were becoming tighter. The poison on the blade, just being near it, seemed to be affecting him. The green vapor radiating from the metal was making the air around them toxic. "Stop playing with him," Dominique shouted from the balcony. "Finish it, Thorn." Lysander's eyes narrowed. He caught Valerius's wrist mid-swing. The impact sounded like a cannon blast. The floor beneath them cracked in a spiderweb pattern. "Enough," Lysander snarled. Ice exploded from Lysander's grip. It raced up Valerius's arm, freezing the sleeve of his jacket, frosting his skin. Valerius howled, dropping the sword. Lysander kicked the brute in the chest. Valerius flew backward, crashing into the banquet table, sending crystal punch bowls and silver platters flying in a shower of glass and wine that looked too much like blood. Silence fell over the room. Lysander stood in the center of the wreckage, breathing heavily. He looked at the council members on the balcony. "The grievance is answered," Lysander announced, his voice echoing. "Valerius is defeated. My claim stands." He turned to walk toward Alara. He looked tired. There was a sheen of sweat on his forehead, and his hands were trembling slightly. "Let's go," he murmured as he reached her, taking her hand. "We need to leave. Now." "Not so fast," a voice rasped. Alara turned. Valerius was standing up. He was bleeding from the mouth, and his left arm hung uselessly at his side, frozen blue. But he was smiling. "The grievance," Valerius wheezed, "is only over when one heart stops beating." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, remote device. Lysander's eyes went wide. "Alara, down." He tackled her. The windows of the ballroom shattered inward. Gunfire erupted from the darkness outside. It wasn't normal bullets. These were tracer rounds, glowing with ultraviolet light, UV rounds, deadly to vampires. Chaos erupted. The masquerade dissolved into a stampede. Vampires screamed as the UV rounds burned their skin. The attendees trampled each other in a desperate bid for the exits. "He broke the masquerade," Lysander hissed, shielding Alara with his body as glass and bullets rained down around them. "He brought mercenaries. We have to move," Alara shouted, grabbing his arm. 3 men in tactical gear rappelled down from the shattered skylight, landing in the center of the room. They raised assault rifles. Lysander stood up, pulling Alara behind him. He raised a hand, and a wall of thick, opaque ice sprang up from the floor, blocking the hail of bullets. The ice chipped and cracked under the assault. "The exit is blocked," Lysander said, analyzing the room with frantic intensity. "Valerius has sealed the doors." Alara looked around. The kitchen. She had worked in food service. She knew how venues were laid out. "The service elevator," she said. "In the back. It goes to the loading dock." Lysander nodded. "Lead the way." They ran. They sprinted through the chaos, dodging terrified vampires and advancing mercenaries. Valerius was shouting orders somewhere in the smoke, laughing like a madman. They burst into the kitchen. It was empty, the staff having fled. "There." Alara pointed to the freight elevator. But as they ran toward it, the heavy metal door of the walk-in freezer burst open. A massive figure stepped out, Valerius's lieutenant, a vampire almost as big as his master, wielding a fire axe. He swung at Alara. "No." Lysander shoved her aside. The axe buried itself in Lysander's shoulder. A sickening thud echoed in the kitchen. Lysander cried out, a sound of pure agony, and dropped to one knee. Lysander! Alara screamed. The lieutenant wrenched the axe free, preparing for a killing blow. Lysander was down, clutching his shoulder, blood dark, viscous crimson, pouring between his fingers. He was too slow to dodge the next hit. Alara didn't think. She didn't have magic. She didn't have super speed. She had a tray of sizzling hot oil sitting on a prep station next to her. She grabbed the handle of the fryer basket and swung it with all her might. The hot oil splashed across the lieutenant's face. He shrieked, blinding him instantly, the heat searing his heightened senses. He stumbled back, dropping the axe, clawing at his eyes. "Get up!" Alara yelled, grabbing Lysander's good arm. "Get up, please." Lysander grit his teeth, his eyes flashing gold. He forced himself to his feet, pain etched into every line of his face. He looked at Alara with a mixture of shock and awe. "Go," he rasped. They scrambled into the freight elevator. Alara slammed the red button. The heavy grate rattled shut just as the lieutenant slammed against it, roaring in blind fury. The elevator descended. Lysander slid down the wall, leaving a streak of blood on the metal. He was pale, deadly pale, even for a vampire. "The axe," he whispered, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Coated in white ash. And silver." "We're getting you out," Alara said, her hands shaking as she ripped the hem of her velvet dress. She pressed the fabric against his wound. "Hold this. Alara. Don't talk. Save your strength." The elevator dinged. The loading dock. It was raining outside. Heavy, torrential rain that washed the city clean. "My car," Lysander mumbled. "It tracks my ring. It will be near." Alara dragged him out into the rain. He was heavy, dead weight leaning against her. She felt the immense power in him flickering, dimming like a dying bulb. A sleek black shape roared around the corner, the limousine, driving itself. It screeched to a halt in front of them. The back door popped open. Alara shoved Lysander inside and scrambled in after him. "Tower," she commanded the car. "No," Lysander wheezed, grabbing her wrist. His grip was weak. "Not the tower. They will expect that. Siege laid." "Then where?" Alara cried. "The old quarter," he said, his eyes fluttering shut. "St. Jude's, the crypt. Safe." Alara leaned forward to the intercom. "St. Jude's Church. The crypt. Go." The car sped off into the night, leaving the burning mansion and the screams of the dying behind them. The crypt of St. Jude's was cold, smelling of damp earth and centuries of silence. Alara had half carried, half dragged Lysander down the hidden stone steps behind the altar. The car had left them at the back gate, vanishing into the night to act as a decoy. The space was small, lit only by the flashlight on Alara's phone. There was a stone slab in the center, a sarcophagus. "Here," Lysander groaned. She helped him onto the stone slab. He lay back, his breath rattling in his chest. The wound on his shoulder was ugly, black veins were spreading from the gash, creeping up his neck toward his jaw. Alara stripped off her soaked velvet jacket. She was shivering, her dress ruined, her hands covered in his blood. "What do I do?" she asked, panic rising in her throat. "Lysander, tell me what to do. Do you need a doctor?" "Medicine. Human medicine. Useless," he whispered. His eyes were open, but they were unfocused. The golden fire in them was dim, like dying embers. "The ash, it prevents healing. It burns the blood." "How do I stop it?" "You can't," he said softly. "Only fresh blood. Strong blood. To purge the poison." Alara froze. She looked at his fangs, which had descended in his pain. She looked at the veins pulsing in her own wrist. "You need to feed," she said. Lysander closed his eyes and turned his head away. "No, I will not. You're dying." "Better to die," he murmured, "than to drain you." "I am too weak to control it. If I start, I might not stop. I will kill you, Alara." "No, you won't," she said firmly. She stepped closer to the slab. "Alara, leave me," he warned, his voice gaining a sudden, desperate edge. "Get out. Save yourself. When the hunger takes over, I will be a monster." "You're not a monster," she said. "You're the man who bought wine to save a cashier." You're the man who played the piano in the dark. She reached out and touched his face. His skin was freezing like ice. He flinched at her warmth. I trust you, she whispered. She sat on the edge of the sarcophagus. She pulled her hair back, exposing the curve of her neck. The pulse there beat frantically, thump-thump, thump-thump, a drumbeat calling to the predator inside him. Lysander groaned, a sound of pure hunger. His hands gripped the stone so hard the rock cracked. Please, he begged. Don't make me. I'm not making you, Alara said. I'm giving it to you. It's a gift, Lysander. Take it. She leaned forward, pressing her neck against his cold lips. The smell of her blood, the heat of her skin, it snapped the last thread of his restraint. With a guttural growl, Lysander's hands came up, not to hurt her, but to cradle her head. He pulled her down. He bit. Alara gasped, a sharp intake of breath as the fangs pierced her skin. It hurt, a sharp, stinging pain, but then it was gone, replaced by a strange, floating sensation. She felt her heartbeat sync with the rhythm of his swallowing. She felt the heat leave her body and flow into him. It was intimate, terrifying, and overwhelmingly powerful. She wrapped her arms around his shoulders, holding him as he drank. She stroked his hair, whispering nonsense words of comfort. I am here. I have you. She felt his mind brush against hers. The wall she had built during training crumbled, but not because of an attack. It crumbled because the door was opened from the inside. She felt his emotions. Not the cold, distant facade he wore, but the truth. The centuries of loneliness. The crushing guilt of his family's death. The fear, the terrified, childlike fear of losing her. Light, his mind whispered to hers. You are the only light. Her vision began to blur. The edges of the room grew dark. She was getting cold. Lysander, she whispered, her voice slurring. Stop. He didn't stop. The beast had the reins. Lysander, she cried out, her voice weaker. Please. He froze. The sound of her distress cut through the haze of bloodlust. With a shuddering gasp, he tore himself away from her. He fell back onto the stone, chest heaving, her blood smeared across his mouth. Alara swayed, dizzy. She would have fallen off the slab if he hadn't caught her. He moved with a speed that had returned, strong and sure. He caught her and pulled her against his chest, holding her upright. Alara, he breathed, his voice horrified. Alara, look at me. She blinked, trying to focus. The world was spinning. I'm okay. Just tired. Lysander looked at her neck. The wounds were already closing, vampire saliva had healing properties, but she was pale. Too pale. He bit his own wrist, tearing the skin, and pressed it to her lips. Drink, he commanded. A little. It will restore you. Alara recoiled. I can't. You must. Please. She hesitated, then touched her tongue to the wound. The blood tasted metallic, copper and salt, but underneath it was something like electric current. It sizzled on her tongue. She swallowed. Warmth exploded in her stomach. Color rushed back to her cheeks. The dizziness vanished, replaced by a surge of artificial energy. She pulled away, wiping her mouth. They sat there in the dark crypt, both of them covered in blood, breathing in sync. Lysander looked at his shoulder. The black veins were gone. The wound had knit itself together, leaving only a faint, silver scar. He looked at Alara. The amber fire in his eyes was back, brighter than she had ever seen it. But the coldness was gone. In its place was a raw, naked vulnerability. You saved me, he said, sounding as if he couldn't quite believe it. You gave your life essence, for me. I told you, Alara said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. I'm not a victim anymore. I make my own choices. Lysander slowly reached out and traced the line of her jaw. Then choose this. Leave the city. Tonight. I have resources. I can send you to Europe, to Asia. Somewhere Valerius cannot find you. I will stay and finish this. No, Alara said instantly. Alara. No, she repeated, grabbing his hand. We're in this together. Valerius tried to kill me too. He burned your home. He tried to kill us both. I'm not running. She looked him in the eye. Besides, she added, a small, tired smile touching her lips. You still owe me my first paycheck. Lysander stared at her for a long moment. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a rusty, jagged sound, but it was real. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck, right over the spot where he had bitten her. You are insane, he murmured against her skin. Wonderfully, terrifyingly insane. I learned from the best, she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a long time, gathering their strength in the silence of the grave. The council, Lysander said eventually, pulling back. His face was hard again, the general returning to the war room. They saw Valerius break the masquerade. They saw the UV rounds. The humans saw it. What does that mean? It means civil war, Lysander said. The council will be in chaos. Valerius has shown his hand. He doesn't care about our laws. He wants to rule, even if he has to rule over a pile of ashes. How do we stop him? Alara asked. He has an army. He has mercenaries. We have something he doesn't, Lysander said, standing up. He offered his hand to her. What? We have the truth, Lysander said. And we have the keys to the kingdom. He pulled a heavy iron key from inside his torn shirt. The Thorn Tower wasn't just a home, Alara. It was a seal. Beneath the foundation lies the armory of the first king. My ancestor. Alara's eyes widened. You have an armory? I have weapons that haven't seen the light of the moon in 600 years, Lysander said, his voice dark with promise. Valerius brought guns to a knife fight. We are going to bring a dragon. The sun was rising when they emerged from the crypt. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed in a pale, gray light. They stole a car, an old sedan parked near the church, and drove back toward the center of the city. The Thorn Tower stood tall against the skyline, but smoke was billowing from the upper floors. Valerius's men had attacked it. My home, Lysander said, his hands tightening on the steering wheel until the leather creaked. We'll take it back, Alara said. They didn't drive to the main entrance. Lysander drove to an abandoned subway station 3 blocks away. They broke the lock on the gate and descended into the dark tunnels. The subway lines were built over the old catacombs, Lysander explained, leading the way with supernatural night vision. Alara held onto his coat, stumbling over the uneven tracks. They walked for a mile until they reached a dead end. A brick wall covered in graffiti. Lysander bit his thumb and pressed his bloody print against a specific brick. The wall groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling. The bricks rearranged themselves, folding inward to reveal a heavy iron door covered in runes. The back door, Lysander said. He pushed it open. Inside was a circular chamber. In the center stood a massive stone table. And sitting at the table, polishing a pair of silver pistols, was Silas. The butler looked up. He was bruised, his pristine suit torn, but he was alive. Master Lysander, Silas said, standing up with a sigh of relief. Miss Vance. You look terrible. Good to see you too, Silas, Lysander said, walking over and clapping the older man on the shoulder. The tower. Lost, Silas said grimly. The Vipers have taken the penthouse. They're searching for the vault key. They won't find it, Lysander said, tapping his chest. What of the staff? Evacuated. Safe. Good. Lysander turned to the far wall of the chamber. It was lined with weapons. Not modern guns, but ancient, terrifying things. Swords that glowed with blue light. Crossbows with obsidian bolts. And vials of liquid that swirled with storm clouds. Valerius is in my home, Lysander said, picking up a long, curved blade. He thinks he has won. He thinks I am dead. He turned to Alara. Alara, he said. This is where you stay. With Silas. No, Alara said. I'm coming. Alara, where I am going, I cannot protect you. I am going to unleash hell. I don't need you to protect me, Alara said. She walked over to the wall and picked up a compact, repeating crossbow. It was heavy, but she hefted it onto her shoulder. I trained for 2 weeks on how to resist mind control. I know the layout of the tower better than Valerius's goons. I digitized the blueprints, remember. She looked at him. You can't get to the penthouse without the security codes for the internal elevators. I changed them yesterday morning. Standard security protocol. Lysander stared at her. A slow grin spread across his face. You locked them out of the elevators? I locked them out of everything, Alara said. The AC, the lights, the water. If they're in the penthouse, they're trapped in a dark, hot box. Lysander laughed. Remind me never to cross you, Alara Vance. He turned to Silas. Suit up, old friend. We are taking back the tower. The assault on Thorn Tower began at noon. It wasn't a siege. It was an extermination. Using the service tunnels, the three of them infiltrated the basement levels. Lysander moved like a wraith, silencing the guards before they could even radio for help. Silas, it turned out, was a lethal marksman, using dual pistols with silencers to drop enemies with clinical precision. Alara stayed between them, guiding them through the labyrinth of corridors. Left here, she whispered, checking the tablet she had salvaged from Silas's stash. Thermal sensors are active in the main hall. We have to bypass through the ventilation maintenance shaft. They crawled through the narrow spaces, dust and grease staining their clothes. They reached the 50th floor, 10 floors below the penthouse. Here, Alara said, stopping at a junction box. This controls the fire suppression system for the top floors. Can you trigger it? Lysander asked. Better, Alara said, wiring the tablet into the box. I can reverse it. Instead of water, I can pump in the halon gas from the server rooms. It sucks the oxygen out of the air. Vampires don't need to breathe much, Lysander noted. No, Alara smiled grimly. But their mercenaries do. She hit enter. High above them, alarms began to blare. Now, Lysander said, his eyes glowing. We go up. They took the stairs, moving fast. When they reached the penthouse doors, Lysander didn't bother with the key. He placed both hands on the heavy double doors. He concentrated, the air around him dropping to absolute zero. The metal groaned, crystallized, and then shattered inward like glass. They stepped into the penthouse. It was chaos. The human mercenaries were unconscious on the floor, victims of the halon gas. The vampires were stumbling, confused by the alarms and the sudden lack of visibility. Valerius stood by the window, looking out at the city he thought he owned. He turned as the door shattered. Thorn, he roared. You are like a cockroach. And you, Lysander said, stepping over the body of a fallen viper, are trespassing. Valerius drew a new sword, this one jagged and black. Kill them. Kill them all. 12 iron vipers charged. Lysander moved. He was a whirlwind of ice and steel. He froze the ground, making them slip, then struck with the precision of a surgeon. Silas took cover behind the sofa, firing silver bullets into the knees and shoulders of the attackers. Alara ducked behind the mahogany desk, Lysander's desk. A vampire lunged over it, grabbing at her. She raised the crossbow and fired. The bolt took him in the throat. He choked, clawing at the obsidian shaft, and fell back. Alara's hands were shaking, but she reloaded. One down. The battle raged. Furniture was smashed. The priceless art was shredded. Finally, it was just Lysander and Valerius. They circled each other in the center of the ruined room. You are weak, Thorn, Valerius spat. You care for the cattle. You let the human bleed you. That human, Lysander said, his voice calm and deadly, has more honor in her little finger than you have in your entire lineage. Valerius lunged. Lysander didn't dodge this time. He caught the blade. With his bare hand. The black metal sliced into his palm, but Lysander didn't flinch. He gripped the blade, his blood dripping down the steel. You forgot one thing, Valerius, Lysander whispered, leaning in close. What? Valerius sneered, trying to pull the sword free. I am the Winter King, Lysander said. The blood on the sword froze. The ice traveled down the blade instantly, faster than thought. It hit Valerius's hand, freezing it to the hilt. It traveled up his arm, encasing his shoulder, his chest, his neck. Valerius screamed, but the sound was cut off as the ice covered his mouth. In seconds, Valerius was a statue of frozen horror, caught mid-scream, holding the sword that was frozen to Lysander's hand. Lysander released the blade. He stepped back. He looked at the frozen figure of his enemy. Shatter, Lysander whispered. He snapped his fingers. The statue of Valerius exploded. Thousands of shards of frozen flesh and ice rained down onto the floor, chiming like bells. It was over. Lysander stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, his hand bleeding freely now. Lysander! Alara ran from behind the desk. She reached him just as his knees gave out. He collapsed into her arms, the adrenaline finally fading, the exhaustion and the injuries taking their toll. "We did it," he whispered, leaning his forehead against hers. "We did," Alara said, holding him tight. "We really did." Silas stood up from behind the sofa, brushing dust from his jacket. He looked at the pile of ice that used to be Valerius. "I will fetch the mop," Silas deadpanned. The sun rose over Viridia, indifferent to the violence of the night before. Its pale winter light filtered through the shattered floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, illuminating the wreckage. The air smelled of ozone, halon gas, and the copper tang of spilled blood. Lysander sat on the edge of the ruined mahogany desk, a makeshift bandage torn from Alara's dress, wrapped around his hand where he had caught the blade. He looked less like a king and more like a statue that had been toppled and hastily set back upright. His skin was gray, the immense expenditure of power having drained him to his very marrow. Alara moved through the room, picking up the pieces. Literally. She swept shards of frozen flesh and glass into a pile, her movements mechanical. It was a way to process the horror, to tidy it away into something manageable. "Stop." Lysander's voice was a rasp, rough as sandpaper. Alara paused, broom in hand. "Someone has to clean up." "Silas has a crew coming," Lysander said. "Leave the dead, Alara. Come here." She hesitated, then propped the broom against an overturned sofa and walked to him. She stood between his knees, her hands resting tentatively on his uninjured shoulder. "How is the hand?" she asked softly. "It will heal," he said, not looking at the wound. He was looking at her. His amber eyes traced the bruises on her arms, the soot on her cheek, the exhaustion etched into her features. "I dragged you into hell." "I walked in," Alara corrected him. "I took the elevator." A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You did." He reached out with his good hand and touched the side of her neck, right over the spot where he had bitten her in the crypt. The wound was gone, healed by his own blood, but the memory of it hung between them like a physical weight. "Can you feel it?" he whispered. Alara nodded slowly. She could. It was a hum in the back of her mind, a low-frequency vibration that wasn't hers. It was him. She could feel his exhaustion, his relief, and underneath it all, a profound, terrified adoration. "The blood bond," Lysander explained, his thumb stroking her jaw. "It usually fades with time. But we shared deep. I was dying. You were willing. That changes the alchemy." "So I'm stuck with you in my head?" Alara asked, but there was no fear in her voice. "And I in yours," Lysander said. "I can feel your worry. It tastes like burnt sugar." "I'm worried about what happens next," Alara admitted. "Valerius is gone. But the council. Dominique, they won't just let this slide. You killed a faction leader. You destroyed the masquerade." Lysander's expression hardened. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the cold mask of the primo-gen. "They will come," he said. "Like vultures to a carcass. They will expect me to be weak. Injured. Apologetic." He stood up, wincing slightly as his healing shoulder protested. He walked to the shattered window and looked out at the city. "They have forgotten who I am," he murmured. "They have forgotten why the Thorn family ruled for 3 centuries. We were not diplomats, Alara. We were the storm that cleared the air." He turned back to her. "I need to address them. Tonight. At the summit." "You can barely stand," Alara argued. "Then I will sit," Lysander said. "But I must be there. And—" He paused, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "I need you by my side. Not as a servant. Not as an employee." "As what?" "As my consort," Lysander said. The word hung in the air, heavy and ancient. In the eyes of the law, a consort shares the primogen status. To attack you is to attack me. To question you is to question me. It is the only way to keep you safe now." Alara stared at him. "Consort. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, the grim kind where the princess wears iron shoes. Is it just for safety? She asked quietly. Lysander crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat. He took her face in his hands, ignoring the pain in his bandaged palm. Alara, he whispered, his forehead resting against hers. I have lived 600 years. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have loved and lost and buried my heart in ice to stop the pain. I thought I was done. I thought I was just waiting for the end. He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. Then you walked into my store. You with your crooked name tag and your brave, foolish heart. You saved me, Alara. In every way a being can be saved. No, it is not just for safety. Alara felt tears prick her eyes. She wasn't a crying person, crying didn't pay the rent, but the raw honesty in his voice broke through her defenses. Okay, she whispered. Okay, let's go scare some vampires. The summit was held in the neutral ground, the grand library of the city, a massive Gothic structure that was technically public property, but, in the supernatural world, served as the council's courtroom. The atmosphere was tense. The news of Valerius's death had spread like wildfire. The Iron Vipers were leaderless and scattering. The other factions, the Silver Circle, the Nightwalkers, the Court of Shadows, were circling, waiting to see if the Lion of Thorn Tower was truly back, or if he was just a wounded animal waiting to be put down. Lysander and Alara arrived in a new car, a heavily armored SUV that Silas drove with aggressive precision. They didn't enter through the back. They walked up the main steps. Lysander wore a fresh suit, cut to hide his bandages. He walked with a cane, an ebony stick topped with a silver wolf's head, but he didn't lean on it. He used it as an accessory, a weapon in disguise. Alara wore white. It was Lysander's choice. Let them wear black for mourning, he had said. You're the light. Wear white. It was a sharp, tailored suit, white as fresh snow. She looked severe, modern, and undeniable. When they entered the main chamber, the murmurs stopped instantly. Dominique sat at the head of the long table. To her right sat the representative of the Silver Circle. To her left, an empty chair, Valerius's seat. And at the far end, Lysander's seat. Covered in dust. Lysander walked down the length of the room. His footsteps echoed on the marble. Click, click, click. He didn't sit. He stood behind his chair, gripping the back of it. Alara stood next to him, her hands clasped behind her back, mimicking Silas's posture of watchful readiness. Lysander, Dominique said, her violet eyes cool. We did not expect you. We heard you were incapacitated. You heard wrong, Lysander said. His voice was calm, but it carried to the back of the room without effort. I am merely tidying up. You killed a council member, the Silver Circle representative said, a man named Marcus with skin like parchment. Without a trial. Without sanction. He attacked me during a masquerade, Lysander countered. He used human mercenaries. He used UV rounds. He broke the first law. Do not reveal our nature. Lysander leaned forward. Valerius was a rabid dog. I put him down. If any of you wish to dispute my judgment, the floor is open. He let the silence stretch. He let his gaze drift over every face in the room. His eyes were glowing faintly. The threat was palpable. Who wants to be next? No one moved. Good, Lysander said. Then we move to business. The territory of the Iron Vipers is now forfeit. By the right of conquest, it falls to me. You cannot hold two districts. Dominique protested. It upsets the balance. I do not intend to hold it, Lysander said. He turned to Alara. I am ceding the administration of the East End to my consort. The room exploded. A human. Marcus sputtered, standing up. You give a district to a human? It's an abomination. She is not just a human, Lysander said, his voice dropping to a deadly growl. She is Alara of House Thorn. And she has done more to protect the city in 2 days than this council has done in a decade. He looked at Alara. Your turn. Alara stepped forward. Her heart was hammering, but she remembered the ice. She remembered the crypt. She remembered that these monsters were just people with sharp teeth and unchecked egos. The East End has been neglected, Alara said, her voice steady. Valerius used it as a feeding ground. He preyed on the poor. He created a mess that drew police attention. That stops now. She placed a folder on the table. I am implementing a new policy. No unauthorized feeding. No turning of thralls without registration. And we are investing in the community. Buying businesses. Fixing housing. If the herd is healthy, the predators remain unseen. That is how we survive in the modern world. Not by hiding in castles, but by integrating. The vampires stared at her. This was radical. It was corporate. It was sensible. Dominique picked up the folder. She scanned the summary Alara had written up at 4 a.m. the previous night. This is... Dominique paused. Profitable. Extremely, Alara said. Gentrification is the best camouflage. Dominique looked at Alara, really looked at her for the first time. A slow smile spread across her face. I see why you kept her, Lysander, Dominique purred. She has claws. Dominique closed the folder. The council recognizes the claim. The East End is under the administration of Alara Vance. Lysander let out a breath he had been holding. He nodded once to Dominique. Then we are finished here. He took Alara's arm, and they turned to leave. As they walked out, the whispers started again. But they weren't mocking this time. They were fearful. Respectful. They had won. The bell above the door of the 24/7 mart jingled. Alara Vance walked in. She wasn't wearing a vest. She was wearing a cashmere coat and boots that cost more than her old car. Behind the counter, a teenager named Kevin looked up. He was slouching, playing on his phone. We're open, he mumbled. I know, Alara said, smiling. I used to work here. She walked to the back aisle. The wine section. It was fully stocked. She picked up a bottle of the cheap Merlot. The same brand. Sentimental, a low voice asked from behind her. Alara turned. Lysander stood there. He looked healthier now. The gray pallor was gone, replaced by the marble perfection of his kind. He wore a heavy wool coat, his hands in his pockets. He looked out of place among the Doritos and slushy machines, but he also looked at peace. A little, Alara admitted. It feels like a lifetime ago. It was, Lysander said. You were a different person then. Was I? Alara mused. I think I was just waiting. And now? Now I'm busy, she laughed. It was true. The last 6 months had been a whirlwind. Alara had taken the administration of the East End seriously. She had used Thorn money to buy up the slum blocks. She had evicted the drug dealers and the vampires who fed on them. She had set up a scholarship fund. The supernatural community called her the White Queen. The humans just called her that nice lady who bought the community center. Lysander had changed too. He was no longer the ghost in the tower. He attended council meetings. He oversaw the training of the new guards. He even, occasionally, answered his own phone. But the biggest change was between them. They lived in the restored tower. They shared breakfast at sunset. They argued about budgets. They watched bad movies. They hadn't consummated the relationship in the traditional sense. Lysander was terrifyingly old-fashioned and insisted on a courtship that seemed to be measured in decades, but the intimacy was there. The bond. The trust. Are you ready? Lysander asked. The gala starts at 8. Silas will have an aneurysm if we are late. Let him panic, Alara said. It keeps him young. She put the wine back on the shelf. Actually, she said, I don't want the wine. No, no. She walked over to him, stepping into his personal space. She reached up and adjusted his collar. I have everything I need. Lysander's eyes softened. The amber fire turned to liquid gold. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture of reverence. Then let us go home, he said. They walked out of the store, hand in hand. As the door swung shut behind them, the little bell jingled. Outside, the snow had started to fall. It coated the dirty streets of Viridia in a layer of pristine white. The city was still dangerous. There were still monsters in the dark. Valerius had been a symptom, not the disease. There would always be another challenger, another threat. But as Alara stepped into the passenger seat of the car and watched Lysander walk around to the driver's side, she felt no fear. She touched the small, silver ring on her finger, not a wedding ring, but but a signet. The dragon coiled around a sword. She wasn't the girl behind the counter anymore. She wasn't the victim waiting for a savior. She was the queen of the night. And God help anyone who tried to hurt her king. The engine roared to life, and the car disappeared into the snowblind city, leaving only tire tracks that would soon be covered, erasing the past to make room for the future.